Well, hello, friends, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for Concert Conversations as we prepare for what promises to be an extremely memorable Masterworks VI. And we'll get to the music straight away. Why even wait? But I do want to thank our very special guest, the music director of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, Maestro Mark Russell Smith. Thank you for being with us.
It's always great to be here.
Well, and I really enjoy it. I hope you don't mind. I've decided to join you from the beautiful plaza in front of the Vigado in Budapest, where one of our works was performed for the very first time. And I think we'll figure that out pretty quickly. But this concert is going to be extraordinary in that we start returning to Sergei Prokofiev with the home team as our soloist. So please tee up how this program came together. That'll build up to our masterwork finale.
Well, I mean, when the season is being planned, I mean, the first considerations are how to open and how to close. And so we want, great success. We want a big bang on both of those occasions. And so they're among the biggest of bangs in the orchestral literature is Mahler Symphony No. 1. And I've conducted Mahler One quite often, and it's either been for opening night or for closing night. And so it's been a long time coming. Also, this was a COVID. I think this is one of the last of our COVID leftovers. I think Mahler One. I think we're going to end the season with Mahler One of 2020. Right. Anyway, it is one of the most joyous, high-powered, great finales and great, I think, journeys, symphonic journeys that, of course, it's very intense, but it's, a little more straightforward than some Mahler symphonies. I think there certainly is some brooding, but there's a lot less brooding, and the inner movements. Anyway, it's just great and wonderful and colorful and dramatic, and brings people to their feet at the end of the season, which and is a great challenge for the orchestra, but also just everybody knows it pretty well. They played it a lot, I think. And so it's just a wonderful way to have a couple great concerts full of wonderful music.
Well, we're going to spend a healthy amount of time talking about Mahler's First Symphony, but let's not give any short shrift to the Sergei Prokofiev Violin Concerto No. 1.
Right.
Now, as we all know and thoroughly enjoyed at the beginning of March, we had Prokofiev's take on the piano. I don't mean to give you the simple compare and contrast, but what are some of the common themes that we for here?
Well, I mean, it is compare and contrast, because Prokofiev has an incredible lyrical gift, and the melodies that he is able to spin are, especially later on, like in Romeo and Juliet, in Cinderella, in his ballets, in his symphonies, the Fifth Symphony. I mean, just a master of the beautiful long line. And you find this in the first concerto. It is a lyrical piece. It has all sorts of spikiness, but it ultimately is, I would say, much more lyrical than the piano concerto, which is athletic and percussive. There are certainly athletic moments in the first concerto, but it's a beautiful, beautiful long line that is decorated and embellished, and really gives the violinist an opportunity to really sing. And so it is very different than the piano concerto in that way. And of course, I mean, violin is different than piano, just as far as how the sound is made and all that, is the lack of percussiveness. But anyway, I just love the beauty of line and the way that both the orchestra and the soloists have just spin these beautiful, long singing lines.
Well, and we also get to hear from the concert master of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra as our soloist. And I know you hear this a lot from symphony fans, but it really is great when it's great when we have guests, but it's great when we can shine the light on the amazing musicianship within our orchestra. Right,
absolutely. And, we have incredible principals who take solo turns, Naha and Hannah and Andy Parker, and, the list goes on. it just, that's the thing about our orchestra. I mean, they are, of course, fantastic orchestra players, but they're also able to stand in front of, in front of the orchestra and deliver powerful musical performances. And everybody loves when Naha plays. Everybody loves when Hannah plays, when Andy plays. So yeah, it's a continuation of that is great for her development. It's great for the orchestra to hear, and just it's wonderful all around.
Well, here's an extremely facile question, so I beg your indulgence, but I should have asked this from earlier seasons. When Naha is the featured soloist, does it fall then to another member like Emily or someone like that to serve the role of the concertmaster? Or when the violinist is the soloist and the concertmaster, I mean, how does that work?
No, so Emily becomes concertmaster.
Okay.
Right.
Because
and it depends. I mean, sometimes the soloist, if they play a solo in the first half, will go back in the orchestra and sit in the orchestra for the second half, depending on what the rep is. And I frankly don't know the answer to that at this point. If Naha is going to play the second half, I don't know. But that's how committed our players are, because obviously playing a solo, I mean, I know when Hannah played Shalomo, she played in the second half, and it's like, I mean, that's asking a lot, but I ask a lot of our players all the time, and they regularly, produce. And so, yeah, it's a very different thing, a different mentality. And the fact that they're able to shift gears like that just speaks to their professionalism and their great musicianship.
And if we could stick with a more elementary level of question, tell us a little bit then about that role that the concertmaster plays, which is distinct, especially within the strings. The concertmaster has a lot more to do than simply tune. So tell us about some of the more general responsibilities of a concertmaster.
So the concertmaster, right. The concertmaster, well, in the old days, there were no conductors. In the good old days, as the players call it, the good old days before conductors. And so very often the concertmaster would start and stop things, just like when you see in a string quartet, when the violinist gestures for everybody to start and stop together and cut things off. And so the concertmaster would kind of conduct a little bit while they played. As music got more complicated and as the conductor's role became more necessary just to keep things together, the concertmaster role changed in that the concertmaster kind of is the first lieutenant for the conductor. And so because the strings are the biggest section, and because there's all sorts of kind of idiosyncratic things that strings play in a unified way. The bows go, generally speaking, in the same direction, and you approach things like as a group. And so it's really up to the concertmaster to set the bowings, to set, to just set the tone with the entire string section. So the concertmaster physically leads, but also knows the score as well as the conductor does, prepares more, and is able to help with the interpretation. And oftentimes, like more so than I think other conductors, I mark my own parts. So I do a lot of my own bowings. I'm a cellist, and so I do a lot of my own bowings because I know what I want to bring out musically and what bowings are best to achieve that. Not all the time. In many of the pieces I do the bowings, but in many of the other pieces, the concertmaster is the one who does the bowings, the direction of the bow, and then that's passed on to the string principals and is kind of disseminated down to all the rest of the strings. But the concertmaster is really, I mean, in the old days, the concertmaster, if the conductor got sick, would be the assistant conductor and get up there and conduct. That's not the case in our case now. And in modern orchestras, it's less of the case. But the concertmaster is the conduit. And if I have a question, if I have something that's not happening, then I ask the concertmaster, what can we do to, are there some changes that we need to make for the strings that will help realize, what's not happening, or, and so I rely on the concertmaster to be my right-hand person to help things just from a practical standpoint, but also, so I shake the concertmaster's hand because I can't shake 85 hands. It takes too long. And so the concertmaster is symbolically the leader of the musicians. And when I shake the concertmaster's hand, I'm shaking everybody's hand. And when the concertmaster comes out to tune, I mean, she is the head of all these musicians. And so there's a lot of symbolism, but there's also a lot of very practical things that concertmasters do.
Well, and as I said, we're going to spend quite a bit of time with Mahler, but before we go any further, what are some special things that we should be listening for in Prokofiev's first violin
Well, I
concerto?
think the different, this was like 1917, 16, 17, 18, it was a very complicated year in Russia, to put it mildly, and it was one of Prokofiev's most fruitful years, actually. He wrote the First Symphony, he wrote some famous piano sonatas. He was very prolific during this time when like history was changing around him. He's a lyrical composer, and the Rite of Spring had just happened, and so he kind of did his Rite of Spring copy with a piece called the Scythian Suite. And so, I mean, he was trying to figure out his own language in a way, and he's a very lyrical guy, but he also has that spikiness and the kind of the kind of rhythmically based charge stuff that Stravinsky really brought to the fore. And so we have both of those elements here. It leans more lyrical than, let's say, the Second Piano Concerto, like we talked about. But there's definitely both of those elements, and the way that he envelops the soloist, with just beautiful lines, transparent, just amazing colors. And if you know the ballets like Romeo and Juliet, like I said, like Cinderella, all these magical textures that he creates are absolutely in this concerto. And so just the wizardry he has orchestrationally and the things he creates for the orchestra are really amazing.
Well, I know we're all looking forward to it. Can't wait to hear that. But I wanted to start our conversation on Mahler. I know this will come as a shock to you, Maestro, in a slightly unorthodox way.
Okay.
What is it about Mahler that just about every other really great composer that we know, right? We wouldn't really think our first choice would be to listen to Beethoven's First Symphony, Mendelssohn's First Symphony, the first works. They tend to get better as they go by, but Mahler's very first symphony is extremely iconic. Why is it that what distinguishes either him as a composer or the music just standing alone for its own sake? Why do we keep coming back to Mahler One? And I say that I'm glad we're coming back to Mahler.
Right. Because he speaks, because his approach and his style and the way he communicates was very different, was unique, was so direct, was so much himself. I mean, he laid bare all his complex emotions, the joy, exuberance, the angst, the tenderness. I mean, he just puts it all out there, more so, I think, than other composers around his era. I mean, I've been reading the letters and about the friendship between Richard Strauss and Mahler, who are, kind of the star musicians, the star composers, the star conductors of their generation, but like couldn't be more different people. And like people got Strauss because he was facile and skilled and kind of superficial in a way, but like just uber skilled. People didn't get Mahler because he was like saying things that other people were kind of uncomfortable saying, or that he was speaking so directly psychologically that it made like people kind of uptight. And so what is great about Mahler is that he speaks about these things with such color and such clarity. It's complicated. I mean, the music is very, very complicated, and the way he uses the orchestra is extremely complicated orchestrationally. It's super hard to play. The directness and the way Mahler is unabashed about these things is why he's different, why he's unique, and why even his first symphony was a home run. It took him a while to get this going and to get his language, to get comfortable with his language. Mahler writes two things. He writes songs and he writes symphonies. And very often those two things are together. And this symphony is based on songs, on a song cycle, Songs of a Wayfarer. And so, I mean, he quotes previous music from himself, and therefore you have to know the words and the psychology behind it. But it's just super rich and super potent, and I think speaks directly. And of course, the ending is just so fantastic.
Well, so again, this is coming out of a very different world, right? So early 20th century Vienna, or a broader period often referred to as fin de siècle, even though, of course, as I said, I'm joining you from Budapest because he was also a conductor there, and that's where this house actually is where he first premiered it. But you mentioned psychology, and that's no light term if you're thinking about Vienna in the early 20th century. You've got Freud running around telling people things about psychology, and people took music so much, well, not, and I shouldn't just say music, everything was so much more integrated into other sciences, arts, current events, politics, everything else, resulting in what we shorthand call the salon culture. But I wonder if Mahler had been in London, say, or Rome, I mean, I don't know that you have the same foment.
No, I agree. No, it's a fascinating time. And Mahler, Mahler visited Freud famously, I mean, it's a time for guys like Mahler to, people now we're starting to be more overt about thinking about the things that Mahler was living with all his life. I mean, he was an outsider from on many levels his entire life, so there's all that he's dealing with, an abusive father. I mean, he's a Jew in a world where that is problematic.
I think what I hear you're saying is that Mahler it was more on the surface that it was okay. I mean, it was okay to discuss that. I mean, nobody cared about Handel's brutal father, right? But it helps us to appreciate and connect with a composer like Mahler.
Well, now it does. I mean, in Mahler's time, they didn't get him. And it's not like people were just like comfortable discussing parental abuse or what it's like to be an outsider or anti-Semitism, or people weren't talking about that. But Mahler was addressing that musically, artistically, and that's why today, he of many composers resonates the most with people today. I mean, if you like, it's always a Mahler symphony is always a big event because he's complicated, he's complex, he's up, he's down, he's tragic, he's exuberant, he's despondent, and that's how we are today. And I think we're I wouldn't say more comfortable with it, but I mean, at least we're more comfortable talking about it. And I think that's why he resonates with the modern person now, more so than a buttoned up Mozart, or more so, just I would say in a different way than the more rigorous, symphonists, the more classic. It speaks in a different way. But Mahler's complex personality and Mahler's diversity really, I think, resonates in us, and people understand that music just more kind of inherently.
And maybe I'm going too far afield, but there is something about that intersection between the art and the person. And you mentioned Mozart. I mean, prior to Peter Shaffer's play Amadeus, I don't know that people really, they didn't make the same connection until after seeing something like that, and that's what we're seeing, I think, here with Mahler. But another question from your perspective: usually our composers give us very simple language about movements that are one or two words, allegro molto, andante. But I love these descriptions from Mahler. The first movement, langsam, schleppend, wie ein Naturlaub, im Anfang sehr gemächlich. I mean, it's very, very prescriptive. And does that make things easier for you as a conductor or harder?
Well, so Mahler, so this is a whole other thing about Mahler. He was a conductor, and he knows exactly what conductors do, what musicians do. I mean, he knows the tendencies of things. And so he wants things. I mean, he was not just a conductor, he was like the greatest conductor of his generation, and one of the most exacting conductors, and would just, insist that the players do things the way he wanted and the way things he thought they should be musically. And so in the scores, I mean, he writes 1,000 words about what the conductor needs to do, about the direction of things, about how instruments should be played. I mean, just gives us so many directions. And so you would think that that's actually very liberating and very specific, but I mean, he's super specific, but what we have to do is incorporate everything that Mahler tells us, but make it organic. Mahler tells us about pushing and pulling. Mahler tells us about the way instruments should be played, about what should happen, what shouldn't happen. But it also has to sound spontaneous, And so what I tell my students and what I strive for in my Mahler interpretations are doing everything that's there, every accent, every push, every pull, everything that Mahler tells us, because he is so specific, but it can't sound contrived. It has to sound very natural. And so how to get all of those things, all the pushes and pulls, all the kind of directional things, it's actually a real lesson I mean, he was a great Wagnerian conductor, and it's a great lesson in the style of music making of that day, where it was just expected, where there's pushes and pulls, and there are all sorts of things the composers didn't tell us that conductors did and the musicians did. And so it's knowing the score like the back of your hand, but making it sound like you're making it up as you go along. And that's the big challenge, and that's what makes it cool and great.
Well, time for another left field question. Sorry about this. I'm not going to go into the realm of synesthesia, but with Mahler's work, especially this work, I have a very strong connotation to a certain painting. It's not a well-known painting. It's just from the college's collection, but I don't know if I had heard Mahler's first in close proximity to first appreciating this painting, but now I can't see that painting without hearing Mahler. And I just wonder, do you have visual connotations that you ascribe to, not necessarily this one, but including this one, where it's like you can just, again, I think other people, you listen to Mahler and you start visioning Gustav Klimt, and maybe that's just a temporal thing, but right, do you make connections like that across media?
Well, sometimes. I mean, for this movement, for this piece in particular, I mean, there's a famous painting, it's called the Hunter's Funeral, where all the animals, like the animals of the forest, are, burying the hunter, the dead hunter. And so it's this kind of macabre turn of things. And supposedly this is what inspired the third movement, Mahler's third movement, with the Frere Jacques, the D minor Frere Jacques. So, I mean, there is an actual work of art. So, I mean, that plays a role. Another thing that Mahler was criticized for in this is like the kind of street music, the gypsy music, the band music, the klezmer, I mean, just introducing all that in a symphony, which is this sacred form, I mean, he received a lot of flack for that. But look, I mean, this is what he hears. He's trying desperately to notate the world around him with sounds, with Wie ein Natur, like a nature call, fanfares from way off, I mean, things happening at different times, just like it does in real life. You hear music over here from the bar, and you hear the military band playing reveille, and I mean, he's just desperately trying to notate the unnotatable in a way, and that's another thing. I mean, Mahler is painting a picture, a musical picture of the world, and the world is complex, and the world happens in different times, and so I mean, that's why it's also appealing, because the sounds are so evocative and so full of musical psychology and sound psychology.
Well, and now you mentioned the third, so I just need some help with this. My German's not terrible, but the notation for the third is feierlich und gemessen ohne zu schleppen. Now, what does that mean musically, ohne zu schleppen?
Don't be too slow. Don't schlep. don't schlep. I mean, don't schlep. Ohne zu schleppen. It's feierlich, which is like solemn, and yeah, and measured because it's a march, but it should not be too slow.
Well, thank you for that, and we're certainly going to enjoy it. Now, something you brought up just a moment ago that I would like to come back to is we have been talking about how you end a Masterworks, how you end a season. This season began with one of the great iconic symphonies, right? And ends with one of the great iconic symphonies. What are the things that those two hold in common, despite that their times and their composers were so different? They were both largely, there's a heavy connotation to Vienna, but what is it that we can see that makes these elevate above so much of the rest of the repertoire?
Well, I think it's the psychological journey that both composers take us on. I mean, from the journey from D minor to D major in Beethoven, and the journey from strictly instrumental to bursting forth with choral music, with the human voice. I mean, that whole journey is why that symphony has the resonance that it does. And it's not a dissimilar journey with Mahler One. I mean, certainly there's exuberance and there's like rustic dance and there are all sorts of colorful things, but especially the last movement, which is the longest and which is so full of tension and finally the release at the end with just the incredibly triumphant D major. It's so over the top that he even asked the horns like to stand up. The horn section stands up at the end. That's in the score, like horns stand up here. It's just like, how much more over the top could you be? And so it's the journey that both of these pieces take us on that make them so fulfilling, I think, and actually make them good matches, for alpha and omega of our season.
I guess I had forgotten that about the horns. I mean, our horn section, they're such shrinking violets, I hope we can get those wallflowers to,
Well, they're extra horns. There's not just the usual 4. We have seven horns, and actually in this case we'll have 8 horns, so they'll all be standing up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, our time is rapidly running away. Anything you'd like to leave us with? And if nothing else, I want to make sure people are going to the website at qcso.org, because this is not the end of music making for the symphony. We've got a lovely up-close program with Jessica Warren later in April. I understand something about a beauty and a beast or something along those lines. And then there's this whole notion, Emmanuel Axe. Are you kidding me? So what do you want to leave us with, Maestro?
Well, it's been an incredible journey, and this. We try to make each season different, but also just incredibly fulfilling in total. And I think we've been able to do that. And I've just been so grateful for how our audience has responded with numbers and with their enthusiasm. And it's going to be a great night and a great afternoon. So this is really one not to be missed. Naha is a star. Everybody loves her. And the Mahler One is really, it's an experience. Like Beethoven 9. Every time there's a Mahler symphony, it's an experience. And it's not, it's great on CD, or on Spotify or whatever, but being there, there's nothing like being there. And so I just strongly encourage people to be there.
Well, there's always so much to be grateful for at a journey's end. We're thankful to Chris Connolly and Wells Fargo Advisors for support of this series. We're thankful to the audiences who really want concert conversations, because otherwise you and I would just be sitting around by the fire and not doing anything like that. But mostly, Maestro, on behalf of all Quad City Symphony Orchestra fans, thank you for the time you spend with us to make our appreciation of these already extraordinary experiences even greater. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, and friends, we'll see you in the concert hall.